In today's video, get ready to get your nerd on because we're going to take a somewhat scientific look at the ride quality of my new Bilstein suspension. Hello everyone and welcome to the Dad Wagon channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review on my Bilstein B16 PSS10 coilover kit that I recently installed. And we're going to mainly be focusing on ride quality, not necessarily performance just yet. Reason being, I've found all too often in forums and social media posts, after people install coilovers, they say absolutely ludicrous things. Like, these things ride better than stock, or I can barely tell the difference between my OE setup and these new coilovers. This has to be complete BS, right? I'm sure as car enthusiasts, and I know I've been there, I think we get caught up in the emotional tie to our new part that we just bought and the investment we made in it, and we adjust our expectations a little bit. I mean, an OEM suspension setup on most cars, specifically something like a base model Golf, are intended to do two main things really well: maximize safety and maximize comfort, with likely some considerations for minimizing the overall cost of the project and maximizing fuel economy. So it's got to be almost impossible that a performance-focused coilover suspension is as comfortable as a stock setup, right? So that is the question that we're here to answer today, and what we're going to focus on is how does my new coilover setup compare to a stock passenger car setup, and how does it compare to my previously installed lowering spring setup in terms of drivability and comfort. My hypothesis, if we're sticking with the science route here, is that the coilover setup I have installed now is more composed and comfortable than my previous lowering spring setup, but in no ways is it as comfortable as a stock or factory setup. And yes, to figure this out, I could probably rely on the muscles of my backside to tell me the difference. But there's subjectivity in that and bias in it as well. So we're gonna make this a little bit more official with some science.
Science rules.
Okay, science might be a little bit of a strong terminology for what I conducted here, but maybe I should just say we're gonna use data. So here's what I did, and it gets a little long-winded. Using a simple vibration measurement app and the accelerometers in my iPhone, I ran the same 9-mile course 4 different times with 4 different suspension configurations. Set up 0, or the control, as a baseline for comfort. I drove the mom wagon, my wife's 2019 boosted Ford Flex. Everything about this car is set up for comfort, from the suspension to the long and wide wheelbase, and its really only detractor in the comfort department is the factory 20-inch wheels that it came with somewhat low-profile tires. Now for the setups that we're actually going to be comparing. Setup number 1 that I ran on the course was the Dad Wagon on its previous setup. Stock dampers with about 50,000 miles on them and the H&R Sport Springs on 18-inch wheels. Setup number 2 is the Dad Wagon on the new Bilstein B16 coilovers, with the dampers set to 3 out of 10, 10 being the stiffest possible. And finally, setup number 3 is the same setup as number 2, but with the dampers set to a 9 out of 10. Pretty rough. The 9-mile route that we drove, I selected pretty carefully because it included city roads, neighborhoods, expressway driving, and some paved back roads, and obviously a lot of varying speed limits in there. It also included roads that were in extremely poor condition and bumpy, and some that weren't so bad. But remember, I live in Michigan and all of our roads are complete trash. So after I made all these passes, tracking the vibration data on my iPhone, I had a bunch of data that looked a little something like this, that I really had no idea what it really meant. So what do you do in that situation? Well, I called up a scientist to help me figure out what's going on. And luckily for me, the Sport Wagon and all-track community has a resident scientist and enthusiast named Adam Karst. Adam isn't a vibration or seismic scientist per se, but he handles, collects, and analyzes data on a regular basis. So I was sure that he could help me out with this. Also, I didn't tell him which setup was which, I just provided him the data to see what patterns he noticed on each run. Let's see what Adam had to say about each. All right, so Adam, for everyone out there, tell us, first of all, a little bit about your wagon, because everyone loves it on the Facebook page, and you've done some really awesome mods, and it's subtle yet
beautiful.
So yeah, I've got the 2018 Sport Wagon. I've got the goofy base trim S with the 4Motion and a DSG. So like a lot of us purchased that and immediately tried to turn it kind of into a Golf R wagon.
Yep.
So much like yours, IS-38, Unitronic software, all the bolt-on crap, downpipe, intercooler, charge pipes, I've got a United Motorsport Haldex tune to try to help put more power back. It's kind of on what I'll call like a sport touring suspension, which is pretty similar to what you had, which is H&R Sport Springs.
Yep.
But I did the Bilstein Sport dampers, which ride pretty good. You know, some nice light wheels, an APR big brake kit. I've tracked it, I've drag raced it. It's a lot of fun. And it's probably the coolest car I've ever owned in terms of just being fun to drive, and it surprises people.
On to the data a little bit. So your background, you are a geologist and deal with data more than I do, which is why I pulled you in to help me out and help interpret this as best as we can. What were you looking at in general when comparing these?
What your app was doing is it's X, Y, or YX, I can't remember. You have two in the horizontal and a Z up, down. So your phone is moving as you drive. And so it's recording movement. We looked at some graphical representations of the data, which actually can be kind of hard to see. I analyze data statistically. So I just did some very simple statistics on the raw data. So mean, median, mode, standard deviation, min, max, and then max minus min. So maybe the gross largest movement that you had on the run, and just tried to just look and see what the differences were between these parameters.
When looking at the data as compared to that control, what did you notice about run number one?
Run one looked to have the largest overall movement. It actually had a pretty similar statistical look to it to the control, but the movements were larger, which tells me something's moving a lot with that one, but it's not vibrating maybe, which would be really tight, you know, tight, frequent movements versus kind of large oscillating movements. So that's what I thought about number one, was largest movement.
Same question now compared to that control, which again was my wife's Ford Flex. What did you notice about run number two?
So two looked closer to the control in terms of tighter movements. The control looks very tight. So nothing really wild or large, but just tight data together. And that makes sense for a stock car, especially like a family SUV. So I thought two's, all the statistical parameters were larger than your control, but that standard deviation was similar. So they were tight. I just felt like that was kind of a similar to the control in some ways.
Okay, that would make sense. And then finally for run number three.
So number three had the largest of, it had the highest of all the parameters. So it looked to me to be the most, it's not the most absolute movement like one, but it had all the numbers were the highest. So that one seemed to be, my interpretation was the most vibration, the most shaking, the most movement in the data set.
Cool. Yeah, no, that made sense. And kind of falls right into, you know, I guess what I was aiming for. So
it's nice when your testing shows what your hypothesis is.
So I'll let you take a guess first. Any hunches as to what was what in those three?
Well, so we know the control was your family vehicles. I would have said one was the sport springs on the stock dampers, because those dampers aren't going to control that movement of that higher rate spring. I would have said that 2 and 3 were your coils, and 3 had to be on the highest damping setting where you're getting kind of beat up.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. Anyway. Well, thank you so much for your time, Adam. And if there's ever anything I can do for you, you definitely let me know.
All right, man. It's good talking to you, Victor.
Yeah, you too. I appreciate the help.
So let me try and recap Adam's findings. First off, the control, or the Ford Flex, performed just as it should. The data showed its ride quality to be controlled, yet comfortable, and the lack of moderate consistent vibrations in the data proved that the ride was not overly firm. Of the 3 different suspensions tested on the Golf itself, the Bilstein coilovers with the damper set to 3, or setup number 2, most closely resembled that of the control data, or the Ford Flex, but it did have more pronounced data variations throughout the entire run. This leads me to conclude that of all the setups tested, setup number 2 would be the most comfortable or similar to that of an OEM passenger vehicle. But it is important to note that the ride was firmer in all circumstances and in all parts of the course. So between this data and my personal subjective data after completing a 600-mile road trip, I can definitely say that the PSS10 kit from Bilstein is rather comfortable for daily driving for a performance setup, but it's definitely not as comfortable as stock. Setup 1, or the lowering springs with the stock dampers, was objectively and subjectively more bouncy, or the least composed setup. And setup number 3, the new coilovers set to 9, was an absolute nightmare on Michigan roads, but I do look forward to getting to test this out on a track in the future. I know, this seems like a lot of detail to go through just to prove out what most of us already believed we knew and suspected anyways. However, for me personally, it's great to see that the investment in a quality set of coilovers and dampers really can be objectively worthwhile to achieve a well-composed and somewhat comfortable project car. And when it comes to my Bilstein PSS10s, I'm very satisfied with my purchase. I really do hope you enjoyed this detailed look at suspension, and if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me, and a huge shout out and thank you to Adam Karst for helping me understand all this data. If you like this content, give it a like and a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like it, as always, don't forget to subscribe, and all your comments mean the world to me, so throw them down there if you got any.